just starting a podcast, but you go, like that, straight into the microphone, and that's the start.
Good. Yeah, that's not going to edit well at all.
Well, it's okay. Now you know where to cut.
The listeners are listening in their ears, and they're like, what the heck am I listening to right now?
Are you keeping the burp in? That
Unprofessional
wasn't even a burp.
buffoon.
That was a cough.
Yeah, I couldn't tell.
Anyway, this is Bad at Magic, a podcast where we talk about how we're bad at magic, but that's okay because the first step to being sort of good at something is sucking at something. And if you are just now listening to this and our beautiful sultry voices and my weird cough burp thing, I don't rightly know what that was, then I should also let you guys know that Bad at Magic is a podcast available on multiple podcast platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And we upload videos to YouTube of our podcasts as well. And we really encourage you to like and subscribe and maybe leave a comment, maybe ring that little bell, do all the things that all the YouTubers tell you to do.
It does actually make a difference, and we
does.
appreciate it.
I appreciate it more than you do, though.
Wow. Are you calling me ungrateful?
Yeah. No, I'm just a child of divorce, so I have to be liked.
You always got to one-up me.
I try my best. Well, okay.
I
try
know
my
you
best.
do, and I appreciate it.
Exactly.
It's not unnoticed, and I appreciate you for trying.
I'm trying to talk about her topic today.
So bad.
Yeah, it is
so forced.
I hope
and
you don't.
People say that these shows are scripted.
Yeah, people are like, "Are you scripted?" Yeah, it's just we're bad at it, but that's fine because we'll get better at it. Anyway, this week we're
training wheels.
Yeah, that's a good way to word it. We're working our way up to our big person bike.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right now we're on one of those cute little tricycles.
We're only 12 episodes in.
Yeah, that's like 2 in podcast years. That's basically still a toddler. We're still a toddler. I was gonna say I could fight a baby. I could still fight. I could fight this podcast.
I would rather you didn't.
I would rather I didn't either. I know I'd win. Anyways, we're talking about deck building pitfalls this week. We're just going to be talking about sort of the things that you have to look out for when you are going on your deck building journey within our favorite format of choice, Commander. There's a lot of sort of, I guess you could say, sort of like notions that people have when going in with deck building that I think just aren't really the way things are now, in terms of like how you tackle building a deck and just kind of the process. It's changed greatly since I first started.
I feel like a lot of the resources that are out there for deck building these days are out of date. And a lot of the things that we used to do, we don't do anymore. Yeah. We don't follow those rigid templates of 10 ramp cards, 10 card draw cards, 5 board wipes, 5 single target removal pieces, and like 30, or like a super regimented list like that. We don't do that anymore. Things have evolved, and part of that is commanders just do everything now, but part of that too is just cards have gotten more niche. That dynamic of deck building changes from deck to deck now. There's no one size fits all template that will build every deck. You can get started with that, but it's kind of a trap to constrain yourself to the logic of yesteryear. If you don't land in these traps, then you're going to have a more fun deck that does the thing more often, and you're going to enjoy yourself that much more, and your opponents are going to enjoy playing against your deck that much more.
Yeah. And speaking of sort of tools that are sort of things that we don't really use anymore, or maybe we use differently than how we were kind of first sort of initiated into Magic and Commander as a whole. I think a really good place to start is literally like at like the beginning. You haven't even touched anything yet. You haven't even decided on a commander yet. EDH Rec is an amazing website. I love this website. I work for this website. It's
I
a
was
great
about to
resource.
say, there's a motive here.
No, it's, what I'm saying is this. It's that I feel like a lot of people think that EDH rec is like, you look at the first 100 cards on EDH rec and then you have a deck and then you're bam, done. And that's not really what it's for. And I feel like that's a pitfall in itself. It's meant to be a guide to help you make informed decisions about, the kind of deck you want to have. It's not necessarily like a strict list that you copy and paste. You can copy and paste an average deck list, but that changes over time when new cards get released, and the average pieces might not necessarily mesh with one another because one piece might be more popular in one theme than it would be in the theme that you wanted to choose. So it's kind of all over the place.
A lot of times when I'm talking to people these days, in times before, we would go to EDH Rec first,
Mhm.
and we would start our deck building at EDH Rec. And now, a lot of the people that I talk to do it essentially to check their work, to see if they
Yes.
missed anything after the fact.
Mhm.
And by doing that, you can still like make sure that you hit all the synergies or all of
Mhm.
the kind of vegetables that the deck is looking to run,
Yeah.
but you still end up with something that feels like your deck that you made and it has your stamp.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that EDH rec used to be a beginning thing and now it's an end thing, because for me now, when I start brewing a deck, the very first place I go to is Scryfall Advanced Search.
Same
And
here.
I love using a Scryfall Advanced Search. If you don't know how to do it, it at the beginning it's a little confusing, but there's actually a glossary that you can locate on Scryfall that tells you how to do an advanced search. But you can like type in specific keywords or specific text box things. You can even search by flavor text or by artist, or you can even search by commander or mana value or stuff. It's a very good deck building tool, and in my opinion, it makes me feel like I'm more independent as a deck builder, because like when you're bowling and they have like those little like
The bumpers.
rail guards. Yeah. I feel like when I first started brewing, I was leaning heavily on EDH Rec as being that for me. But I feel like now that I've moved to doing advanced searches on Scryfall, I'm able to like kind of bowl without the guards, so to speak.
Something that I have been very preachy about recently is
Mm.
that players aren't running enough lands in their decks.
Yep. I even wrote that article about like, how lands are like
I helped you with
socks.
that article a
Yep.
lot.
It was
Yeah.
like how
That's
lands
great. I
are.
love that article so much.
I do too. I like it a lot. A lot of people didn't, but no, it was just lands. I think the reason why people run too few lands, and I wrote this specifically, is I like to equate lands as like getting socks for Christmas. You need them, but you don't want them. They're the least exciting thing
Mhm.
to purchase, in my opinion. They're the least exciting thing to include in a deck build, unless it's this really cool utility land like a Nykthos, or for me, it's a Rogue's Passage. I love me a Rogue's Passage. But like no one gets really excited about, oh, I can't wait to run like four basic lands. This is so cool. It gets boring. And it's a practice I'm trying to make standard. I will admit that I continue to fall into this little pit I've created for myself. But a viewer in my chat, Danon, was very nice and told me to in the beginning of my deck building process to just add 50 lands in general, like 50 basics. Obviously that's going to change, but that helps later down the line with cuts in your deck because you kind of already mentally only
Mhm.
have 50 cards. And obviously, I'm not saying run 50 lands unless you're like a lands heavy deck and you want that. But it makes it so you're a little bit more cautious with your cuts, and you're a little bit more selective about the cards that you put into your deck. It's a very nice way to kind of level the playing field, I think.
Another way you can do it is by thinking about your deck not as a 99 card deck, but as a 60 card deck. Like if you're only going to think about the meat potatoes, like that steak and
Hmm.
sizzle for your deck, the stuff that like you actually care about,
Hmm.
it's 60 cards with 39 lands and a commander. If the lands are just going to autofill themselves and we don't really have to worry about that, like we have calculators, and Moxfield in particular will like insert a like sample mana base into your
Hmm.
deck with a button. You don't have to worry about that. You just
Yeah.
worry about the 60 cards that make your deck do the thing that you want it to do.
Hmm.
And then let everything else worry about your lands. Just make sure that you have room for it.
Yeah. Um, I will say though that this kind of ties into something that I kind of experienced. It also kind of ties into a tweet from the lovely Rachel about how if you're not getting enough lands, you need to essentially you need to run more card draw. And an issue I had with that in particular, which is another pitfall of mine, is I have my Cadric deck. It's a Boros deck. There's 37 lands and there are 7 mana rocks in that deck, which is pretty hefty. And I was still really struggling for mana. And like, yeah, the ACMC of that deck is a little higher because planeswalkers tend to not be super cheap. But I was really
Mhm.
struggling and I was very confused as to why I just wasn't drawing into anything I needed. And I kind of realized, okay, maybe I need more card draw, which was not exciting for me. But I started to run things like Idol of Oblivion. I put in a Benny Brax. I put in a Secret Rendezvous. And suddenly I was able to consistently get a little bit more card and a little bit more lands, and the deck felt a little bit more smooth. And I think that kind of ties in perfectly with particularly what Rachel is trying to convey about being a major deck building pitfall.
Yeah, and basically what Rachel is saying is you need more card draw and less ramp. The lower your card quality, the more card advantage that you need. Basically, if you want to have a thematic, budget, or unoptimized deck, make sure you have a high density of card draw spells to make up for it. Essentially, like when I read this, I immediately think, hey, if you've hit the ramp, well, then you don't need more ramp.
Mm-hmm.
If you just run a little bit less ramp, a little bit more card draw, you're still going to consistently hit that ramp. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that when you've already hit that critical mass of ramp, those cards that you're going to be drawing into are going to be a lot more consistently that gas that you need to get over the finish line. When I built my Primal Surge deck, I
Mm-hmm.
built it with like 20 pieces of ramp
Mm-hmm.
and 12 pieces of card draw because the only thing that really mattered was hitting that mana threshold to do the different combos or to cast the Primal Surge. Well, those different combos or casting that Primal Surge is no
Mm-hmm.
good if you can't like actually hit the combo pieces or the Primal Surge
Mm-hmm.
consistently. Like you're just kind of sitting there playing off the top, hoping that you draw an Apex Devastator or
Mm-hmm.
hoping that you draw like literally anything playable or anything to get you some card advantage.
I will say I feel like this is a pitfall that I personally struggle with a lot. Card draw is something that I'm very weird with. I tend to not be in colors that are blue. All of my decks, every single one of them have red. And the
Locust God is in the corner, very disappointed in you right now because Locust God is a very blue deck.
he's a very blue
There are,
deck,
there
but
are definitely blue pips on the Locust God.
of course, but there's the thing that I find absolutely fascinating with me is that the decks that I play the most are the decks that are, how do I say this? Have advantage built into them. So I'm so
Mhm.
used to not worrying about it. Like my Alibu deck is a Boros deck. And so you think, okay, you're gonna need pretty consistent card draw. Not necessarily. There is, of course,
You're
pieces of card
stacking your
draw in
deck.
there. Exactly. I literally layer my deck to perfection. So I'm not worrying about what is on top. I know what's on top. I put it there. The same thing goes for
Yeah.
Elminster too. He's also about stacking my deck to exile big spells and get tokens, but there's so much scry in the deck. There's so much top deck manipulation. It almost seems unfair. So I play those decks so much that when I get to my other decks that need that extra help, I'm like, well, why is this not working? It works in my other decks. And I have to remind myself, well, those other decks are so specific on what they do that I just kind of forget. And that's kind of a major issue I have to deal with lately.
Think about it this way too. Card draw in particular is incredibly polarizing. Like think of the best card draw spells and card draw enchantments in the format, like
Hmm.
Rhystic Study, like Necropotence, like Wheel of Fortune,
Windfall.
any of those different kinds of cards, even like
Hmm.
Night's Whisper.
Hmm.
There's the Painful Truths, the Converge card draw spell, which is basically a
Yes.
3 mana draw 3. There is a huge ceiling for like good card draw spells. And there's a lot of really good card draw spells that you
Hmm.
can run in your decks, but there's a big difference between that and like Expedite or like Revitalize possibility, like stuff like that. There's a time and a place for all of them. All of these different card draw spells have a place. It's just that we don't immediately think about them because our head immediately goes to the most powerful card draw that we can think of.
Yeah, of
And
course.
after we get through that list of the most powerful card draw, we are less incentivized to run anything past that.
Yeah, yeah. I think we kind of become blind a little bit to our
Mhm.
options because Commander has thousands upon thousands of cards for us to choose from, but we really have kind of fallen prey to that sort of like power
Stabilitis.
yeah, I want to say that because one thing you said, I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. This
Yeah.
card isn't bad, it just hasn't found its right deck yet. Like there are
Mhm.
other certain cards that I would not dream of running in, say, like Hedron Alignment is a card that everyone considers to be a pretty bad enchantment. But I like it in Elminster because people read that giant chunk of text and think, oh, well, you can't have multiple copies of this card. I, for one hand, think it's great because it's repeatable scry and it is a garbage card in any other deck ever. But in Elminster specifically, it works kind of beautifully. It just needed its place, you know?
Mhm.
So I think that's kind of the same with card draw because there's a lot of decks that really, you're like, oh well, I don't want to run faithless looting, but there's other decks where you discarding cards is a good thing in addition to getting that benefit.
There's this pitfall, there's this trap of, well, if I can't put it in every deck ever, then it must
Mm-hmm.
not be a great card. No, it's a fantastic card. It's just not a fantastic card in every deck, which I
Mm-hmm.
like. I don't want to run the same cards in every single deck
Yeah, it gets
because
boring.
then I'm just playing a reconfiguration of the same deck in different,
Exactly.
either in different colors or with a different commander,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so on. Like that's not my thing. That I don't find that fun.
Yeah. I think there's also a habit of me where I now look at a card and I'm like, if this card is like cheap in my mind, I'm like, well, then it's not good if it's cheap, which
Yeah.
is so
If it's not nine
stupid.
dollars, then it must suck.
How stupid is that of me to do? Like, come on. There's some really good cards that are just cheap and that's fine. I don't know why I do that,
Hmm.
but it's a thing that you have to unlearn.
One thing like I think I've had to unlearn over the last like recent months, especially, is our conversation, our favorite buzzword: run more removal, run more
Yep.
interaction. Done a whole episode on that. There's a little thing up in the corner telling you to go listen to that episode and put it on another tab.
Mhm.
But you don't necessarily have to run more removal in your decks. Just run more ways to meaningfully interact with the board state, meaningfully
Mhm.
change the game. You don't have to fill your deck to the brim with Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But like a Dramoka or a Linvala or a Grand Abolisher goes a long way.
Mhm.
You don't have to run a Drannith Magistrate. I don't know. Maybe run a Citadel of Pain or a Price of Progress and punish people for ramping or punish people for playing greedy mana bases.
This is a lesson that you taught me, particularly with counter spells, is like reframing your frame. Beautiful
Hmm.
phrasing on Chase's part here. Reframing your perspective when it comes to
Nice.
removal.
So proud of
Yeah,
you.
thanks. But like, I used to hate counter spells, and this was the thing that you helped me with. I used to hate counter spells. I would never want to run counter spells. I thought they made me have feels bad moments, and then they turned into it actually being removal on the stack, and that really helped kind of make a difference in me in my deck building style because I would used to never run counter spells, even if it was smart to. It just made me feel bad. And now I'm like, okay, well, this makes sense. It's a different kind of removal. And even in our episode that we had, removal being like having your removal be like fit with your theme. Make it more fun
Hmm.
for you to run removal, like with Alibu and Dispatch versus like a Path to Exile or something like that. Like, have fun with your removal and make it fit for what you're trying to go for instead of just falling into the stapleitis sort of thing that we talked about.
I think a softer way to reframe this too is not necessarily saying run less removal, or sorry, run more removal, run more interaction, but run more roadblocks, run more speed bumps, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Put a little sandpaper on the table. Make
Give it
things a little bit
texture.
interesting. Make
Give
them
it
make
texture.
hey, give the game some texture.
Highlighting removal and interaction, I'm starting to lean more into the word interaction than I am towards removal, and I feel like we've buzzworded the hell out of removal to the point where it's lost its meaning and has only become a negative connotation. Interaction, I think, is way more fun because I made this whole like tweet thread about it, but like in essence, it's just like a lot of games that I've seen people do just end up being four people trying to assemble their own machine faster than the other person, and then whoever pops off first wins. And that's cool and that's fine and that's fun and that's dandy. Those are decks that I love to do. But like you're supposed to be playing a game with other people, and you're literally supposed to be interacting with your opponents, not even in the game, but just like at the table. You're with friends or strangers, and running interaction literally makes you interact with those people, and you have way more fun and crazier stories. And it's just, I just find it to be way more enjoyable.
You used a very like interesting word there, and I want
Okay.
to highlight it. It's the
Okay.
word with. You're playing a game with people.
Mhm.
You're not playing a game around other people,
Mhm.
because it's essentially what a lot of the commander meta has become in a lot of our cases. People are playing a game around other people. They're at the same table. They're technically in the same game with each other, but they're not doing anything about each other.
Yeah. It's just a race.
That's a pitfall. That's a trap that people have fallen into in their deck building. They have built their
Mhm.
deck in such a way that they can't play with other people.
Mhm.
They can't go up against the things that other people are doing. They're doing their own thing. They're operating independently from the rest of the game. You'll notice it when it's one person, but when the whole table is doing that, you become blind to it. You become
Yeah.
blind to the fact that you guys aren't actually playing a game with each other anymore.
And I think people get so caught up on the deck building puzzle. That's a thing I like to do. I deck build once a week, trying to do it every week depending on like scheduling and stuff. But like it's fun to do it, to create and solve this puzzle when you're building this very intricate sort of piece with the deck. But then there's also the puzzle of how that piece fits in with a pod of 4 or 3 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of the puzzle that we end up kind of ignoring, because we think that like we finish once we finish the deck, but like each deck has its own unique interaction with other decks and other metas and LGSs, and you know I mean, like, things interact weirdly with each other, and I don't know, you're not done once you kind of click enter and put in a title on Moxville. There's still how it interacts, and I think that's something that we kind of forget too, is how it fits in with other decks.
I have never built a deck that has been a perfect 100 on the
No,
first try.
never, never.
10 games
Yeah,
in,
you
I've
never. I
kind of got
have
a
though.
better idea. But
I've
after just building the deck and not even like playing it once, or even just goldfishing it a couple times real quick, it is never perfect. Ever. And that's okay. That's a good thing.
Mhm.
If everyone was just kind of doing it
Yeah.
perfect on the first try, we probably wouldn't be having this episode right now.
Not every deck is going to be perfect out of the gate. I think it's way more fun to change and grow as cards get
Mm-hmm.
released or cards get banned or as you are introduced to new metas. But, that being said, I think I kind of want to talk about something that I've wanted to expand on this for a while. I really love your opinion on it, if I'm being completely honest, just because I don't know how I feel about the phrasing and the terminology with this. But the concept of cute cards, I feel like cute cards are interesting. They're a little hard to define, but essentially cute cards are cards that kind of seem like cheeky or like fun, but would rarely kind of have a grand impact on the game. Like there's very interesting interactions that can be had with cute cards, but they don't really go anywhere other than huh, that's kind of neat. And that's really it.
The quintessential cute card that I can think of is a card called Seed Time. It's a green extra turn spell. It's one in a green. You can only cast it on your turn if another player has cast a blue spell on your turn. And it
Hmm.
fits that theme of green being like the anti-blue and the anti-black color.
Hmm.
But these cute cards are like, they're gotcha cards. Like Seed Time is a gotcha card for, hey, you got greedy, you cast that brainstorm on my end step. I'm going to take an extra turn because you cast that brainstorm on my end
Yeah.
step. They are either the most backbreaking cards you've ever seen, or they are the most unplayable trash you have ever seen because they will never come up. But when they do, they are
Hmm.
very, very fun. And you're
Hmm.
playing them in your deck because that one time that it happens, they're incredibly cool.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, hey, don't run these cards, because I am sure as hell going to run these cards until the end of time.
Hmm.
But I am accepting that I know that this card is going to be a dead card quite often,
Yeah.
and you're playing it for that cool moment. There's a difference between a cute card and a pet card. And I
There
think
it
that
is.
is something that you and I both wanted to make abundantly clear. There's a big
Yes.
difference between these two. A pet card is a cute card that actually has a role in your greater strategy. It's not just
Mhm.
kind of in there as a treat.
Yeah. So I'm really glad that you said that because especially with you kind of very blatantly emphasizing, cute cards, they're more often than not they're dead, but like when they do the thing, they're really cool. I'm really glad that you said that because in my head I was really trying to find a way other to describe it other than like cheeky or like, like a ooh, but like I think it's a really good way to put it because that happens to me a lot when I'm deck building where, chat will recommend a card and I'm like, this would be really cute if I got like that one little threshold. It would be so
Yeah.
good. But it's very rarely going to happen because it's so dependent on circumstances outside of your control. Like you can't control this person doing this. Therefore, it's going to be more than not just a blank space. It might as well be a land that you're running.
And this kind of hits on an extrapolation of this thought that I constantly try and remind people of, and that's running cards to justify other cards.
Yeah, that's happened a
Um,
lot.
I've noticed this pattern in deck building where it's like I'm running this card, so I have to run this card and this card and this card, and suddenly
Mhm.
that's 4 slots in your 100 card deck. Like that
Mhm.
is a non-insignificant amount of your deck. And there are cards that you can run to justify the cute cards, and those are the trappiest of the trap cards.
Mhm.
Seed time in particular, there's nothing that you can do about that. That's on your opponents.
Yeah.
But the example that I always bring up, and this kind of extrapolates into a combo discussion, is there's a lot of decks nowadays that run Bullis Citadel and Aetherflux Reservoir because those are like super battle cruisery Timmy
Mhm.
cards. And if you're
Mhm.
running both of those cards, well, you might as well run Sensei's Divining Top so that you have an infinite
Mhm.
combo. You don't need the Sensei's Top. Yeah, is it good? Does it combo? Will it win you the game? Yes. That might not be what you want to do. Don't
Yeah.
fall into the trap of, well, I already have these two pieces. I might as well just add the third combo piece so that I have the infinite combo, the win condition. These self-contained combo cards that are only good with the other combo cards. They're otherwise dead draws in your deck.
I've seen this happen on deck building streams where I will have a commander that really focuses on card draw, and people will tell me to run all Hammer's Archive, and then they go, "Well, if you're running all Hammer's Archive, you can probably put some life gain in here. If you're running that, you
Ding,
might
ding,
as well."
ding.
Or one that just came up to mind, literally right now, I can run like 8.5 tails, but what if I also run like a Circle Protection White, and then I give these things like other sort of like weird it's weird and you just run cards that don't need to be in the deck, but you're like, this would be a nifty little thing to do, which I
Yeah.
think again leads into what you said about cue cards. It's a nifty thing, but is it like the thing or is it like a nifty fun one time people kind of go woo and then it's done and then it's just kind of
Yeah.
there.
I think that if there was one thing on our whole list, it's like this section. Like this is the thing to be realistic with yourself about, because
Mhm.
a lot of people think about Magical Christmas Land or their head immediately goes to Magical Christmas Land, but they don't think about how they're going to get there. They don't think about how are my like first 7 or 8 turns going to pan out before I get to Magical Christmas Land. I didn't think about needing the card draw to get all my combo pieces together. I didn't think about the ramp to pull off my 15 mana combo. I didn't think about
Mhm.
what happens if I get disrupted? What happens if one of my combo pieces gets destroyed? What happens if one
Mhm.
of my combo pieces gets exiled? So my recursion that I thought about doesn't work. There's this slippery slope. Like I understand people don't necessarily take into account, but it's one of those things like you need to be realistic with yourself when you're building your decks,
Mhm.
because if you build your deck to do like one thing and
Mhm.
that one thing doesn't work, are you just dead in the water? Like
Yeah.
do you just like not win the game anymore? Like what happens? Where do you
Mhm.
go from there? Where do you go if you never get to Christmas Land in the first
Mhm.
place?
I think I fall into this category a little bit too as someone who really
You
likes
do.
planeswalkers. I tend to really like constantly run planeswalkers for their ults outside of Super Friends decks because I just find them so alluring and attractive. But how to get there
You're
and how
so
to
used to running them for their alts because of the decks that you run them in, that that logic bleeds over into the other decks when it might not necessarily be
Mhm.
appropriate to think that way.
And it's like, how can you protect your planeswalker? Is there a way to protect it? Can you, generate enough blockers? I mean, like, there's just like a lot of different things that I feel go into Christmas land that I don't know. As somebody who gets really excited about being able to do the thing, it's it's hard to not, just daydream about it. You have to
Hmm.
actually put the work in, and the steps in, the meat, the vegetables into the deck to get you to that point.
Yeah.
Because you can, talk about all day how you were able to do that one cool thing once. But if that happened because somebody like let you, or they didn't threat assess properly, and you suddenly realize, oh, I don't have what I need to get here like I did last time, that's gonna feel rough.
I think a lot of times these situations where you're just kind of sitting there either boil down to like what we've mentioned with not enough card draw, too much ramp,
Mhm.
too much of literally any one thing or any two things.
Mhm.
But it's something we haven't mentioned yet is your deck might just be too busy. Your deck might have too many sub themes. Your deck might just actively have a lot of nombos that are shutting you down from being able to do your own thing
Mhm.
on your own accord. And a lot of times, and I run into this problem a lot, my ideas might feel half baked. If I'm running like a 2 or 3 card synergy, I have a lot of column A, but not a lot of
Mhm.
column B, or I might have too much column B and not enough column C. Because the commander card pool is so deep, there's always a replacement piece for a lot of these different synergies and a lot of these different combos out there. So people are spending a lot of their card slots in their deck
Mhm.
running more things to do rather than redundancy on the couple of things that they actually do want to do.
Yeah, I would say that this isn't my area, because I tend to kind of get focused in on one thing and I run with it. I feel like you
Hmm.
kind of have your spoon in so many
I
different
cast a wide
pots.
net.
Yeah, you cast a wide net, which isn't a bad thing. I think it's very good to have a very diverse deck that, if one thing gets knocked out, you're able to kind of find your way to victory through other means. I
Hmm.
think that's very important to do, because we're not saying focus on one particular theme and that's it.
Yeah,
You're just you get excited about interactions, and I think you get excited about, the what if situations, whereas I
yeah.
am like, I want to make sure I stay true to my theme and my concept, and I have a very strong foundation for that.
And we talked about this in our first episode about doing the thing. There's
Mhm.
more to a deck than doing your the big thing. Your
Exactly.
the big thing should have sub things or little things in case the big thing goes wrong. We played on stream the other day. Actually, crazy, twice in 1 month. Oh my gosh, crazy. I was playing my Lich deck, and yeah, I won by doing a big thing. I played Rise of the Dark Realms and cast Warrior's Oath with Lich in play.
Mhm.
But to get there, I used Celestine to cast Steve 5 times.
Mhm.
That is a thing. That is a very cool thing. A lot of little, very cool things add up and enable that very big, flashy thing. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that people forget about when they're building their decks. It's you have to get there in the first place. You can't do the big thing if you don't get there, if you don't have the support pieces
Mhm.
to pull off that big thing. Like a Rise of the Dark Realms is 9 mana. That's no
Mhm.
good if you don't have 9 mana.
I think a major
Hmm.
pitfall is that people build a deck, the synergy looks really good. You have your friends look over it and they're like, this looks like a cool deck. And then you invest in the deck. And then when you sit down and you play test, it doesn't perform to kind of the expectations that you have in your brain. And so I think a pitfall that I've fallen into personally, I got very lucky with my Sisay. It ended up working. But playtesting your deck before you invest in it, I think, is in itself
Big
a
time.
deck building pitfall. I think, because we're streamers, I feel like we think we have to have like the physical deck, ready, and, have it for prepared, because, you have to be professional. But I've noticed this kind of rising on other people's deck building streams, not deck building streams, gameplay streams, that I find absolutely amazing, and a really great way for you to participate, even if you don't own the deck, is Moxfield has a playtest function that you can hook up into OBS. You could run it through Spell Table, and you can actually play and have your hand hidden and play with other people, and then you can get that deck building experience, because you can solo playtest all you want, but you're never going to know how the game is going to go if you don't have those 3 other people interacting with you.
It's really hard to know how good all of that removal and all of that interaction you've integrated into your deck
Yes.
is when you just don't play it while you goldfish it. You end up with a 6-card hand of nothing but removal spells or nothing but roadblocks.
Mhm.
Like, you don't know how good they are if there's nothing to remove or nothing to put a roadblock up against.
Yeah. Don't feel like you're not allowed to proxy a deck to play test it, or don't feel like you're not allowed to like play on someone's stream if you don't have the physical deck. That's the only way you're going to know if it's going to work. That's the only way you're going to know if you need to make changes. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's the biggest thing for me is, I play tested decks hundreds of times on my deck building stream, but half of the time Chad is like, "Well, I don't really have an opinion about how it plays because it's a 1 versus, 3
0.
3 straw men. How do you
Yeah.
know? You don't."
I think a different perspective,
Mhm.
or getting a different perspective on your deck, I should say, is the easiest way to just quell literally every single one of these pitfalls right from the get-go. A lot of our thinking these days with building decks is very inward.
Mhm.
So, like, something that I've started to do is posting pictures of my decks on Instagram and Twitter a lot more to, maybe get a tweet or two of feedback from people, or saying like, hey, person that I'm friends with but don't really get to play with that often, who plays completely different Magic than I do, what do you think about this card? Because I respect your opinion. And people are so enthusiastic to get involved and respond and help you
Mhm.
build the best deck that you possibly can build. And not from a power perspective, but just the most cohesive deck with the most cohesive idea that you can.
I'm really glad that you said that because that is literally the whole philosophy behind my deck building stream. I It's probably my favorite article I ever wrote, actually, if I have to think about it. I wrote it for TCG Player back when I wrote for them. It's about collaborative deck building, communal deck building, and how it helps open your mind to different perspectives, different metas, different play styles, and how it can help strengthen your deck building muscles. Because you can start from the 99, you can start from the 100, but that's literally my bread and butter. Is you sit down with a group of people and you just turn something into nothing. And I think that's so much more fun because a lot of the decks that I have been through this communal deck building. And I
Mm-hmm.
probably wouldn't have half the decks I have if it weren't for, the people who watch me on Twitch. Genuinely, I do it once a week, and I build things that I hate, from colors I don't like and themes that make me feel uncomfortable, to things I absolutely love and I feel like I could do by myself. It's just all about practice. With that being said, I think there's something I want to kind of tie into as sort of like a beautiful, nice little bow of a wrap up here. Um,
Nice. I see what you did there.
yeah. When it comes to deck building, I have been saying this for years and I will continue to say it. It's my favorite way to describe deck building. Deck building is a muscle. It takes time, it takes practice. You're not going to be great at it out of the gate. I think kind of like going to the gym, you're not going to be able to like do like a deadlift of 400 pounds immediately the day you go in. You're gonna start at, maybe a gentleman's 10,
Mm-hmm.
a very nice slow weight,
Sure.
and that's good. But don't put pressure on yourself to be perfect immediately. Deck building is, in my opinion, probably one of the hardest aspects of Magic because you're literally putting together so many different cogs in a machine. It takes a lot. So if you want to get good at deck building, you're gonna have to be really bad at it for the first however long that you're doing it. I just say that even if you're not proud of the decks that you're building, you can always revisit them. And it takes time. Just keep practicing and talking with other people and sharing different opinions and perspectives. Like you said, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from this is just keep at it.
Yeah, that next deck is always going to be better than the previous deck that you put together.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something to keep in mind, and something that will help you stay motivated. Like, you're only going to get better at doing this. Going to the gym, you're only going to get better at these different lifts, hitting these new PRs, all of this kind of stuff. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
jump off into the deep end right away. Like, Chase doesn't need to go out and build a green deck tomorrow.
God, no.
But like, maybe they could build a teamer deck first, or like
Yeah,
maybe they can build a Gruul deck first, and
there
just
we
take
go.
the baby steps. Like, you don't have to completely get out of your comfort zone right away, because that might turn you off to the idea of all of these different things. And that's the last thing that we would want to do,
Yeah,
or anyone would want to do.
exactly. And you know, just because I think another fun thing is just because you see a lot of like theme decks with a specific commander doesn't mean you have to do that theme. Explore
Hmm.
something new. Try something fun. I've had deck builds where I've given up midway through because I just know I couldn't do it, but at least I tried. And I think that's what makes it more interesting is you never know how a card is going to interact until you really sit down and you just take the time and explore. Thank you so very much for listening to Bad at Magic. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chase, also known as Mana Curves. I'm a Commander content creator streaming Paper Commander and Commander deck building on my Twitch channel, which is Mana Curves. You can also find me writing articles about my favorite format for Star City Games.
And I'm Eddie, Capeless Cards on all of the things. I work behind the scenes with most of your favorite content creators these days. So if you're supporting them, you're also supporting me. You can support this podcast by leaving a like, a comment, a subscription, a review on a podcatcher like iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher, because those really do go a long way. And if you made it this far into the episode, it's not that much of an ask to ask you to do that too, because we really appreciate it and we really appreciate you. If you're in Philly, make sure to come say hi to us. If you're not, maybe we'll have some special surprises from Philly down the road. Got to stay tuned for that kind of thing. And we're going to be omnibus about that for the time being. But we will catch you after Philly